Welcome to the first podcast episode of Two Fungis Talking Food Plots, a series of podcasts dedicated to helping hunters grow better food plots with less work, less equipment, and better food choices, so landowners will have the most attractive food plots in their area that will hold deer and last longer throughout the hunting season. My name is VanderVeen of Strategic Habitat, and my co-host is Brad Harper of Harper Growing Solutions, both based out of West Michigan. In this episode, Brad and I answer several questions submitted by hunters on Facebook and through email. We cover a popular hot topic about liquid lime and fertilizer versus granular lime and fertilizer. If you struggle with soil tests and applying tons of lime and fertilizer on your back 40, then you'll want to hear this one. Brad has been showing several big cash crop ag farmers the benefits of converting to liquid inputs with great results. We also touch on what kind of tank sprayers work best. Can you really grow awesome food plots going no-till? And when it comes to just making your habitat more attractive for deer, where should you start? We hope to cover a lot of other topics in the future, so if you have questions about your food plots, leave them in the comments below and we'll try to answer them in the next episode. With that said, let's talk food plots. Hey Brad, how you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing good, thanks. How are you?
Not too bad. So here we are getting into full-blown food plot ready season, and I would imagine you're getting a lot of calls and questions about liquid fertilizer, liquid lime, and the such, right?
Yes, sir. I mean, we are definitely pretty busy. We're shipping stuff already, and guys are definitely in the zone, getting soil samples sent in, and definitely chomping at the bit to get back at it.
Yep. So a while back, Brad, you had posted on Facebook a notification that we were going to be doing a podcast. And so here we are finally doing this podcast where we said that we would answer a bunch of questions if guys wanted to just post them in that Facebook post. And we actually had quite a few questions that we can answer. And then I think you've also got some other questions that you've been getting from guys online or via email, and some of the more common ones that you want to address as well. So with that said, I guess we can start answering some of these. And the first one that I saw in there was, how would you attack a new plot with a pH that's lower than 5? Would you also apply pelletized or ag lime in addition to the liquid?
And that's a good question. And that is definitely a more common one, to where guys are starting new plots or they're adding on. And with a pH that's sub 5, I mean, there's definitely some work to do there. And you have options, which is nice. I mean, obviously we got liquid lime and we can make that work completely, but that's something that guys still have the option to do ag lime or pel lime. If you have the ability, if you can get a truck back there, or if you wanted to obviously just go and spread your bags of pel lime, that's definitely an option. And that's doable. And I'm not going to ever say that you can't do that in addition. That's just something that is, up to the guy himself, but we can tackle that solely with the liquid lime if we wanted to. And again, depending on rates and your soil type, that might be something where we look at cost and compare those, obviously adding your time in there with both of those. But that's something that I'm not going to turn a guy away if he wants to do that, and that's going to help. But we can definitely still tackle that with the liquid lime by itself.
And so I can just hear the next question, and that is, well, if my pH is at around 5 and it needs a lot of help, if I put down the liquid lime, is that just going to leach through my soil real fast? And so later in the year, I'm going to have to put on more liquid. I mean, does it leach through and the effects are not as permanent as what a granular type of lime is?
Correct. And that's probably one of the most questions that we get. That's something, liquid lime is a smaller particle size, and that's why it's so fast acting. But the downside to that is that it does not last as long. So that's something that with a sub 5, we'd obviously have to look at your CEC number and take into account your soil type so we could get the rate of that. But you figure going out and spraying liquid lime, let's say in the spring for a spring plot, if he's doing soil builder, if he's doing the buckwheat, we might have to come back or might want to come back just in the fall with a smaller application just to make sure we're bumped up. And a lot of the times in heavier soils, we'll do that. We'll come back with 10 or 25% just to make sure. But on average, if we're adding liquid lime, that's going to be, an annual application. That's going to cover you for the season.
Okay, so as far as price goes, then I'm assuming that even if you did it every year and you average that out versus the cost of a pelletized or an ag lime, after 3 years of doing liquid lime every year, I got to believe that that price is about the same, isn't it?
On average, I would say we're almost cheaper because you got to take into effect. I mean, Pell lime is pretty pricey, but that's where you got to take into effect your time. And because we're adding our liquid fertilizers, where you're basically cutting that whole trip out there of spreading, not only the fertilizer part, but the lime part as well. So we're adding that all together, going out one time. So by the time guys are adding up all these numbers, they tell me, holy smokes, we are cheaper. So we can do a better job for that. Now, that's not always the case, but most of the time that is.
Yeah. So, and that is another benefit. We can actually add the liquid fertilizer and the liquid lime to the same tank and put them on both at the same time in one pass.
Correct. And that's just not only a time saver, but you're out there playing around with having a big old egg truck out there spreading. Well, that's not really your time. Obviously, you're going to have to pay for that. But then you are still going out and, how many bags of triple 19 or triple 13 are you spreading? So there's definitely a time and money aspect what goes into that.
Yeah. I mean, I can just imagine somebody's got a 2-acre food plot. Once you walk your pelletized lime on there with, say, a walk behind fertilizer spreader, and then once the lime is on, now you got to do the same thing again with fertilizer. Oh man, that's a lot of loading up the hopper and walking back and forth, and
boy, a lot of back and forth.
When you can just spray it once, with both at the same time, man, what a time saver that is. And I think if guys were to go through that experience just once, they'll probably say, man, I'm not dealing with granular ever again. This is just way too easy.
Yeah, it is. And I get that a lot. Being able to just mix everything together and go spray it out. I mean, that's hard to beat.
Yeah.
And kind of touching on that note and diving a little deeper into the lime discussion, guys are asking about Pell lime compared to ag lime. I see a lot on the internet of Pell lime being, oh, well, if your soil test calls for 2,000 pounds of ag lime, you only need 200 pounds of Pell lime. Well, that's definitely not the case. On average, you are about 10% the other way. So rather than needing 200 when it calls for 2,000, you might be able to get away with 1,800 instead of 2,000. And I got a couple of sources pulled up that definitely go into some really good details. They're not huge articles, but they are good reads. One is MSU extension, and it's selecting a liming material.
And Brad, I could probably put the links to those articles right underneath this podcast if somebody wanted to check those out.
Okay, perfect.
Right on this page.
I'll do that. I get a lot of questions with guys thinking, hey, well, I read it piqued my interest, but it sounds like snake oil. Can you tell me about it? We go through a ton of liquid lime on the ag side. We're doing a lot more intensive research on the ag side, and guys are keeping a lot better numbers. So, I mean, just that it's going out like crazy on the ag side is a huge pointer that, yes, it does do what we say it does. On average, in a ton of ag lime, depending on where the mine is, and that's where it varies, but there's 6 to 15 pounds of calcium carbonate in a ton. And that calcium carbonate is what actually makes the reaction. So that's why our liquid lime, we can say that a gallon does equal a ton. It's equivalent because there's 14 pounds of calcium carbonate in our gallon. So that's where we can relate to that. So with that being said, that's something that when you're looking to get a liquid lime, just read the label. Calcium carbonate is basically the main ingredient. There's definitely magnesium carbonate in there. There's a lot of products out there that if you read the label, it just says calcium chloride. Now, a lot of those guys say that they put that out and their food plots were better, which is probably definitely true because that was just something that they might not have had calcium on there before. So if you're going to add some calcium, you probably will see better results. But as far as changing pH, calcium chloride will not change your pH. That's where we have our plot doctor calcium, and we see that calcium is definitely deficient quite often across the board in a lot of soils. So if you're adding a calcium input, that will help your food plots, and that might be why guys are seeing success.
So Brad, you're saying that liquid calcium chloride is not as effective as liquid calcium carbonate, which is what you have.
Correct. And like I said, I mean, that's just a calcium input. That's, you're basically putting that on to get calcium out there. That's something that calcium chloride is used a lot for de-icing the roadways, if that tells you anything. But that is not going to change your pH.
Right, right. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, isn't that the stuff that's readily available on store shelves, like at, I don't know, TSC or something like that?
Yeah, I know there's a lot of stores that definitely carry that. And that's definitely one that's talked about a lot on the internet in a lot of these group chats and forums that, like I said, do your research and just make sure you're getting something that is going to achieve your goal. If you're trying to change your pH, you're going to want to look at something that has calcium carbonate in there. If you're just trying to go out with a calcium product to get calcium out there, then that's an option. There's a lot better options out there. But that's something, like I said, just kind of make sure you're knowing what you're going out with that product for, and that it's going to do its job.
Mm-hmm. As far as I know, every time I go into a store like that, I'll pick up and I'll search out, if they have any kind of liquid calcium or liquid lime, and I've not seen anything yet with calcium carbonate in it available in a store. Have you? Do you know of any?
I have not, no.
No.
And like I said, a lot of the times you will see the calcium chloride products, and it almost doesn't matter what they're claiming. Like I said, that's basically the worst calcium input we could do. Just think of chloride. That's all you got to keep thinking of. But
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay. So, Brad, your product is only available online, right? Or
online and at our locations.
what? You got what, 2 or 3 locations now in Michigan?
Yeah, 2. It'll be me. I'm in Montague, and then Lincoln with Packer Max, and he's over in Rockford. And that's the 2 stores that you can actually walk in and get that at. Otherwise, everything else would be online. And then you have TIP, basically the home in Wisconsin.
Oh yeah, that's kind of like the originator.
Correct.
Where it originated. Okay. Yep. Okay. And you can order it right on your site, or so if guys aren't really quite sure, how much they need, is that something that they can email you their test results, and then you'll kind of just lead them into whatever they need?
Exactly. That's the best way to do it, is in which on my website, there's soil sample kits that you can order if you need to do that. And that's what I tell everybody. Once you have your sample, call me, email me, message me on Facebook, and just send me the results of that sample. I'll take a look at that, kind of talk with them. Hey, what's your deer density like? How big are these plots? What are you looking to grow? And we'll work through all those questions, and we'll be able to come up with the exact rates of lime, fertilizer, calcium, and be able to incorporate all those as definitely, obviously liquid, but definitely more efficient options rather than granular.
Yeah, and so I guess on the fertilizer side, then what you're saying is you can take a look at that soil sample, and let's say they're kind of low in magnesium, or let's say they're low in boron or something like that. Some of them trace minerals. That's something that you can custom make that fertilizer. Is that right? By adding some of those separate inputs?
Yeah, we can take a look at, because we have the options of multiple different products. So depending on those samples, we do have the ability to custom make different things for different people and fit your situation of what you're trying to do in your soil directly.
Yeah, that's a heck of a customer service that you're providing there, Brad. I just got to say, I mean, it can be time consuming, going through that with each customer, but you know what, that's probably a great way to ensure somebody some great results, rather than just going out buying a bunch of bags and throwing it on hoping for the best, right?
Correct. And that's where, I mean, we want to make sure that guys are having success. And just by taking a few minutes and kind of going through the soil sample, the crops that he's growing, kind of talk about his goals, and we can definitely make sure that he's, spending the right amount of money where it needs to be, and not having to jump through any hoops or learn in a longer manner, to where we're going to be able to dial them rates and really close to being perfect the first time, just to make sure that he's going to have the best success he can. That's kind of where we're taking the time just to help out and make sure we can do that.
Yeah, no, I think that's awesome. Yeah, try having try having somebody else, from one of these national brands to spend time on a phone with you. Good luck with that, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
I think that's awesome. So one of the other questions on the Facebook thread was guys were wondering, what type of sprayer do you recommend?
So the best sprayer out there is one that you can look at, because they all are different. The main thing I'm looking at when I want to kind of compare sprayers is if it has agitation or not. There are a lot of sprayers out there that don't, but there's still a lot that do have that. So if that's something, all you got to see if it has the ability to recirculate and mix itself. That's going to help not only with keeping things together, especially when we're mixing lime and fertilizer together, but when you're spraying herbicides as well. It's a nice thing to be able to have that agitation that'll help you to calculate your PSI a lot easier. You can, kind of open and close that valve to determine how much is recirculating through that tank. So you can really get your PSI where you want it, as well as keeping things in suspension. So looking at sprayers, that's probably the biggest thing I'm going to look at. I would say overall, most guys have that 25-gallon Fimco on their quads, and that's a good sprayer, and that's fine. Not a problem. That's what I use. So, but if you are getting a new one, that's one thing to look at. And that's probably the only thing that really makes a difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And some of those Femcos do have a recirculating feed on there, don't they?
Yeah, most of them do. I did recently find out that there's some of them that don't, and I don't know if that was, maybe the store ordered them that way. I'm not sure, but most of them that I have seen do have that.
Yeah. So, one of the things when I visit landowners to create a habitat plan for them, I'll talk to them about doing the liquid lime and liquid fertilizer, and it really piques their interest. But for some of the guys that are really remote, they don't have, they got rustic cabins and that type of thing. They don't have any running water. One of their big issues is, man, how do I get water up here? So I guess a couple of options that I normally suggest would be, some guys will have even if they have a small rustic cabin or something of that nature, if they put an eaves trough on their roof and then run a downspout, I'll say, if you can get a hold of one of these IBC totes, an IBC tote is roughly around 350 gallons. It fits right in the back of a pickup truck, no problem. It's got that metal cage around it. A lot of guys probably seen those, but some landowners have run a downspout right into the IBC tote, and over time they just accumulate water, and they'll accumulate more water than what they'll need to actually spray liquid lime and fertilizer on their food plots. So that's just one suggestion.
Correct. And that's where you can find a lot of those totes for sale now. Even if that's something, if you didn't want to do gutters or anything, I always tell guys, well, find a 10-gallon drum or a 15-gallon drum, something that's not too bad. So anytime you're going up there, just fill that thing up from your hose at your house and just keep pouring it in there. As long as it's not open top baking in the sun, you'll be fine, and you'll be able to have that there to at least take care of your plots when you need to.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of food processing companies, even like car washes, they have a lot of their soaps and chemicals that come in these 55-gallon white or blue plastic barrels. And a lot of times you can pick those up for some of them just want to give them away, and some of them sell them for like $5. So yeah, like you say, you throw a couple of those in the back of your pickup truck, just fill them up from home, and then dump them into an IBC tote once you get up there, and you'll have plenty.
Exactly.
So another question that somebody had was, why is it that we cannot adopt no-till instantly on poor to average ground?
And that's a good question. That's where one thing we got to take into consideration on our poor ground is, obviously we're going to talk cover crops, and we want to talk about a diversity of plantings to where, we have rye, we have oats, we have some sorghums, maybe tillage radish, we have some clovers. And by doing that with multiple crops, they're going to all help each other grow. But on poorer soils, you might not get the growth you want. So we might not be getting to add as much green matter back into the dirt as what we want. And one big thing that happens when you are adding that green matter back into those poorer soils, we need to make sure that we are adding enough nitrogen for the microbes to really be converting that. And that's one thing that, because we're not getting enough nitrogen, or that's leaching through on poorer soils, that is one thing that really lacks as far as trying to get that no-till to really take off and do what we want. But as far as building your organic matter and, trying to get that no-till system to work, that really goes hand in hand with, again, mainly diversity of crops, getting all those growing together, making sure we do have good fertility and an increase in nitrogen, just to make sure that the soil can break that down.
Hmm. I see some guys getting frustrated with the no-till system. They tried it for the first time one year and it didn't really quite work out the way they hoped. And so they just gave up on it and went back to tilling and disking and all that. So I will say, if you do want to go the no-till route, you got to give yourself at least a couple years, because first of all, the first year, you're probably not as familiar with the process as you will become later. And the other issue too is if some guys are opening up a new food plot, and if there's too much regular cool season grass, the types of grass that we have on our lawn, if you have too much of that, that's quite a root system that is really difficult to start that no-till process unless you open up that ground a little bit. And so I've run into that a little bit too, where I've become victim to just too much grass, and should have probably run a disc a little bit deeper, or maybe run the harrow over it a bunch more times just to expose a little bit more of that soil. But yeah, on a first year no-till, don't expect perfection. But I will say, over time, I know someone out there has done a side-by-side with no-till versus tillage on the same field. And then the deer, after about 3 years, did gravitate over to the no-till side.
Exactly. And that's where, weed competition definitely does come into that. So that's where, again, growing a nice diverse cropping system and trying to get plants like sorghum, having buckwheat in there that are going to get a little bit taller, drowned out those lower plants and drowned out some of those weeds, and kind of making sure that, like you say, I mean, it's definitely a process. It's not something that you're going to see just take over right away. So if you can stick that out, there's definitely benefits to that. But that's something just to keep in mind. Make sure you always got something growing. Try to do diverse plantings and just stick with it.
Yeah, exactly. So another question somebody had was, is it worthwhile to have compost dropped off to spread on small kill plots? And then what kind of compost would you recommend?
That's a good question. And I know that you have had a guy do that as well. I do have one guy that he had beach grass growing where he wanted to do his food plots, just because that was convenient and actually in very good spots. So that's where we had talked about that. And what I would say is get a soil sample of what you're bringing in, just to know exactly. But in a lot of cases, if the dirt is that poor, it definitely can benefit you and cut a lot of years off, rather than just trying to grow oats and rye or whatever it can take, and definitely be a shortcut. So if your ground is that bad, then definitely check that out. As far as sources, that varies, because all over the states, I mean, everyone's different, to where some people might have compost, other ones might have some topsoil. I would just start calling around to some excavating companies, possibly some gravel pits. And a lot of those places, if they don't have something like that, they're going to know where to point you, at least give you a starting point.
Yeah. And I know, like, if a guy happens to be anywhere in central Michigan, there is a place near a little town called Everett called Morgan's Composting. And I was fortunate enough to have some property within about 20 miles of there. And I showed up with a trailer one time, and they loaded up 1 yard of what they call layered ash. And it's basically chicken manure mixed with, a bunch of fibers, wood components. And, they let that sit in compost, and they'll turn it over so that the chicken manure isn't so hot. So I went over there, they loaded a yard onto my trailer. I went back to my sandy property and basically just took the time, and took me a few hours, but I just threw it out shovel by shovel over top of a little kill plot. It actually worked pretty good. I mean, I actually grew brassicas, and I knew it wasn't going to be the best choice, but I really just wanted to see with a side-by-side test how grains and brassicas would grow, and actually didn't do too bad for the very first year. So yeah, like you say, that can be a benefit, but again, it's getting it delivered. It's how do you spread it? And I do have another client up there in Michigan that actually created his own compost pile. He had a local farmer deliver some manure, and then my client just mixed in some yard waste, some leaves, some grass, and just turned it over a few times over the course of a few months with his tractor. and ended up being beautiful stuff. He put it on his food plot, nice and thin, which can be a challenge, but yes, he really did turn his food plot, and I think leapfrogged himself a couple years down the road just with that one application. And definitely, if you are in that kind of a situation where you're so sandy that you think you got to bring in compost, going with, a summer cover crop, like you say, and always having a couple of plantings on there per year, and then not tilling it in, definitely you would just want to, roll it down and then spray it if you don't have a crimper. And instead of trying to work it in the soil, because every time you're working it in the soil, you're burying any organic matter and you're bringing up new sand again. So disking in that situation to me is pretty much out of the question.
Yeah, and that's building that thatch layer right on top and kind of starting from that point going forward.
Yeah, you bet. So that was about the questions that we had on the Facebook post, but I'm sure, Brad, that you've been getting several of the same type questions via email and text and that type of thing from food plotters so far this year, right?
Yeah, I've just getting overloaded with questions on a daily basis, really. And I actually have a couple for you here. I get a lot of the times where guys either have a new property or they're new to habitat and food plot stuff, and they kind of ask, new to this, where do I start? There's so much information out there. There's so many different projects to do, a lot of different routes to go. So with, walking out and taking a look at my property, where do I start?
So yeah, really, if a guy is real serious about taking his property to the next level and he's sick and tired of trying this and trying that, like you said, there is a lot of information online. Really it starts with a habitat plan and a hunting strategy, so that, the goal is to really compartmentalize that property into a property that the deer do not really realize that they're being hunted. So we've got to compartmentalize our bedding areas and our food plots and our travel lanes and our access trails for hunters, and then, proper stand placement, and that includes stands for the early season and then stands for the rut phases and then late season, and everything has got its time for, when you want to hunt a particular stand. And so a lot of times when I get to a property, sometimes the habitat isn't that bad. But what I find is, the landowners are either hunting it at the wrong time or they're hunting the wrong stands at the wrong time of the year. And so it's a matter of just changing some things up and basically screening the hunter access so that the deer do not know they're being hunted. So which is going to result in a lot more daytime deer activity. So that's really where it starts. There's a saying, just because you can plant a food plot in a certain area on the property because it's convenient doesn't mean that you should. And sometimes, putting a food plot in the wrong place is going to add to the pressure, the hunting pressure on the property, which is going to result in more nocturnal deer. So, the old saying, man, I saw a lot of bucks on my trail cameras up until opening day, but once the deer season started, they all disappeared. It's probably one of the most common things that we hear. And that's where a habitat plan will come in. And it really does start from there. So what's another question you normally get, Brad?
Another one has to do with deer densities, and that's where they're looking at not only what to grow in their food plots, but a lot of the times there'll be a guy, let's just say he's got a third of an acre food plot and he planted brassicas and he never got any bulbs. They just, completely tore up the tops, and that was the end of it. And that's where not only changing up your crops and how you do things in order to work with your deer densities is something to definitely take a look at, but as well as, browse. I mean, what, especially with everything you're doing, I mean, what do you see as far as best ways to add some browse along with, changing up to maybe we might not do brassicas, we might plant some clovers just because they can handle a little more browse pressure. But not only that, but like on your side, what would you say for that?
Yeah. So good point. So, either when a guy has a food plot that's getting wiped out, before firearm season even starts, it's a combination sometimes. And that is, the food plots are too small. He does have a high deer population for what he's planting. So, corn, soybeans, brassicas probably going to be out of the question. And in that kind of a situation, you're going to want to plant something that is going to regenerate and handle browsing pressure much, much better. Kind of like what you said, clover, but I kind of like to go with the grains, the winter rye and the oats and the peas and, maybe some radishes, crimson clover, a 5-way blend. That's going to be more difficult for the deer to eat down to the dirt. But the other thing that I think is really overlooked on the blame for food plots getting hammered right down to the dirt is the fact that there's no food out in the timber. Many times you'll see that the timber is just wide open. There's just no understory. It's a really mature woods. It's a high canopy. You can't even get a suntan out in them woods in the middle of the summertime. It's so shaded. And so without that food in the woods, your food plots are just going to get hammered so much faster. So, it really goes back to, you got to take a step back and really think about opening up that canopy. So whether or not that's bringing in a forester and then having him recommend what trees to take out. And I always suggest, doing at least an aggressive select cut. And that's all going to vary based on the types of species you have, but it's all really about opening up that canopy. If you can't get a forester or a logger in there for whatever reason, or, you want results right away, sometimes on some of the smaller woodlots, you can go in there and do a bunch of hinge cutting, which I've already done a bunch of this year and have a bunch more to do later in this year. But, sometimes that's a quick way to create bedding and some woody browse, which is very important for the deer to have. They actually eat more woody browse than they do, food plots or cash crops. Yeah, without that, it's pretty much a losing battle if you don't have any browse out in the woods to kind of supplement your food plots.
Exactly. And that's, I see that a lot. And like you say, in between plots being on the small side, but not having anything to go with that to where that's the only food source, it's really hard to keep that up in order to satisfy that. Like you say, it's kind of a losing battle, but that's definitely a question I get all the time.
Mm-hmm. So, Brad, I've been getting some questions from guys too about, where can I get some of this lime? Where can I get the fertilizer? Do I need a soil test and all that? And what should I plan if I can't do a soil test?
If you think about the cost and really the time for doing a soil sample, on average, it's about $9 or $10, and it doesn't take very much time. If you think about that cost compared to, an extra ton of lime, or even if it's an extra bag of triple 19, or maybe it's an extra half a gallon of my liquid, that's where, that cost is already way beyond that $9 or $10 for that soil sample.
Mm-hmm.
And it can go the other way as well, to where maybe you need a lot more, but you haven't done that sample and you're just throwing out kind of guessing. Well, you might not be doing as good of a job as what you can if you were to get that sample, and you might have to add more. But just knowing where you're at and what your numbers are is going to make a big difference, not only for your wallet, but for your success as well.
Yeah, exactly. So anything else that you wanted just to kind of quick cover here before we wrap this up? Anything you want to just share with people that they might have common questions at this time on?
Yeah, I think for one, anybody that ever has any questions, let me know. I'm on Facebook, Harper Growing Solutions. You can find my website, which Randy will have in here on the below the video. Any questions, let me know, let Randy know. And that's something that we can definitely do another one of these if guys have a lot more questions, or guys just want to, have us touch on a few different topics. I like talking deer, so that's not a problem for me.
Yep, exactly. So, this thing is going to appear on YouTube. It'll appear on Facebook. So yeah, if you have any questions, we will cover those in the next one that we do. So go ahead and post your questions below in the comments, and we'll make sure we get those covered in the next one. And until then, Brad, I think this was good. I hope it helps a lot of people, especially for the newbies out there, to kind of maybe move forward with some confidence. Nothing worse than paralysis by analysis, right?
That's right. There definitely is a lot of information out there. Anything we can do to help.
Yep. I always say, if you really want to get confused, just jump on Facebook and ask a question. I'm sure you'll get about 50 different answers. And
exactly right.
All right. Hey, this was fun, and we will do this again soon. And until then, good food plotting out there, everybody.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Yeah, good luck, everybody, and let us know how you're doing.
All right. See you later, Brad.
All right, take care.
Bye.
Bye.